Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of the Yakking Show Business Channel. And this is the show that brings you actionable tips and ideas from expert guests so you can ensure your business survives and thrives in the interesting times we're heading into. And as always, we have interesting guests. But first, let's introduce co host Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you all so very much for tuning in to our show. We so appreciate having you. And Peter and I have the great privilege of interviewing such wonderful business experts. And of course, today is no exception. We have the great privilege of having Paul Teasdale, all the way from England, with us today. How are you, Paul?
I'm superb. Thanks for having me on.
Now,
Ah, good.
Paul, yes, I'm sorry, Peter.
No, just saying, good to see him. Good to have Paul on the show.
So, Paul is a speaker, he's a business coach and facilitator, as well as a podcast host of Helping People Perform. So, Paul, how do you help people perform using, which is interesting? I really am interested in hearing this. How do you help people perform using the Formula One insights?
Well, thanks for the question. And basically, I had the privilege in my career. I've had some amazing jobs with some amazing different environments and getting all these different experiences. But the most recent one, I spent 7 years working with Formula One team McLaren, who are based here in the UK, in fact, just down the road from me here. And I got to work with that team, helping take out to external businesses the ways of working, some of the technologies, the practices, the leadership insights that make a high performing team like any Formula One team, but McLaren specifically here, that make them tick. And there are certain elements within that, even outside of the world of Formula One, where you can start to say, right, these insights, these tips and tricks are applicable to any organization. So when you start to think about how does a high performing team lead, how does a high performing team work together, what does it mean to have good quality debriefs, how do they communicate together, all sorts of different angles that when you look at an inspirational element such as Formula One team, which they can be, this sort of elite of the elite in motorsport at least, then you can start to bring in some of those learnings and insights and help inspire people so that they can realize that actually high performance is something that is achievable and attainable for themselves. And that's what I do
Mhm.
these days.
Wow, interesting. Before we go on, for our non-European audience who might not be familiar with Formula One, McLaren I know is one of the leading teams. McLaren also produces a very expensive sports car for road use, and that comedian Mr. Bean had one and he crashed it, if I remember rightly. So,
Famously so,
but
yeah.
yeah, does McLaren produce any other cars?
So they are a supercar manufacturer. So
Right.
they started off with the P1 and
Hmm.
the car that Mr. Bean had, and famously cost him over £1 million in
Yeah,
repairs.
that's
Not
right.
not the car itself to begin with. This was the repairs to get it back up and running.
Yeah.
They now do a whole range of cars, and they've actually upped their production. It's still small scale, relevant to other organisations and other
Hmm.
supercars that are out there. But yeah, they've got a whole array of more accessible cars, shall we say. If you've only got a couple of £100,000 burning a hole in your pocket, then there's some options for you there as well.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good to know. But so you talked about McLaren. Who are some of your other clients? Yeah, don't give away any confidential information. But what type of business are you working with? Because high performance sports cars, supercars, are a very small market, right?
Yep.
Or a small number of manufacturers, should I say? Not small in turnover.
So when I was working with McLaren, I was employed by McLaren. I'm
Hmm.
now independent,
Right.
taking my learnings out to clients, and the sort of clients I work with corporates. So I do everything. That's where the speaking comes in. Generally,
Hmm.
where I come in, I'll do a keynote speech or some insights around Formula One, around leadership, teamwork, all those decision making and data driven decisions in particular. Or I can work with the sort of more medium and medium sized businesses who've got a passion for taking the inspiration from the world of Formula One and helping bring that and embed it in with their own organization. So it's ambitious organizations. It doesn't have to be those bigger sizes, but you tend to find that those organizations are already mature enough to a level that they can then up their game. And you're not trying to save somebody from drowning in those cases.
Right.
What you're trying to do is make them an elite sports person in their own right. So that's what I'm trying to do with those organizations.
Okay, interesting.
So
And I've
Paul,
worked with everything from banking, oil and gas. Also, in fact, when I was at McLaren, my first job there was with supermarket shelf stacking. Believe it or not.
Okay.
So there's all sorts of weird and wonderful applications where
Sure.
if you take those ways of working, those technologies or the approaches to technology. So if you want me to elaborate and yak on a little bit on the supermarket shelf stacking, the one of the big giants in the UK, anyway, from a supermarket perspective, we're spending £1 billion a year on the labour cost alone to put things onto shelves.
Wow.
So that's the scale of some of these organizations.
Yeah.
And when you look at the operation of putting things onto shelves, people go out to the back of the store. They go, right, we're going to need 5 tins of these beans and some packets of those crisps, and we're going to need that. Right, let's bring it all back to the shelf. Oh, there isn't room. I thought I needed 5 tins of those beans. I've only got room for 3. And by the way, the soup that's next to them, that's completely empty. And I didn't expect that to be empty because of the way the data flows within.
Right.
You're basing things off assumptions and off predictive data as opposed to sort of live data in real time. So you're wasting a lot of time and money on doing those operations. But funnily enough, they didn't have a clue as to what the scale of this problem was. They can do anecdotal pieces for themselves, but actually, how do we put some numbers around it and put some quanta? And so we took the simulation and modeling expertise that we had in McLaren and started to build up models of their stores.
Okay.
And we're able to say, right, what would happen? Let's use some data to with some machine learning to understand how this operation works. Now, what would happen if we made a change? And this is this sort of idea of the digital twin or the virtual environment where you can just make some tweaks and say, if I made this one tweak here, what would the predictive outcome be? Okay. Therefore, if I know that if I make my shelves slightly deeper, for instance, so they can hold more, what's the impact? Oh, I don't know for sure exactly what the number is, but that looks like it could save me £20 million in that sort of quanta.
Sure.
You don't know the exact, but it's like, okay, well, if that's going to cost me £100 million to do it, there's no point in doing it.
No point doing it. Right.
Whereas if I can come up with a different scenario, if they can play with, let's say, the mix of products that they have. So instead of 47 varieties of soups, I'm going to bring that down to 20. What does that have? That has an impact on the whole process. So you can start to model these things and simulate it and test things in a virtual world so you don't have to in the real world. All the cost and risk associated.
And if a company that's spending £1 billion, you can, if you save them 1%, that's 10 million, right?
Yeah, it's not bad cash.
Wow, not bad cash at all. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
So Paul, what is the biggest factor? What do you think is the biggest factor preventing people from performing to their highest potential?
Clarity tends to be the biggest one. One of the reasons, and we often get asked about, why is it the Formula One teams are so successful or so high performing? Well, it's very clear as to what you're looking to do and what you're there to achieve. So in all parts of the business, if what you're doing isn't delivering a car that is performing as the best that it can or supporting that in some way, then you shouldn't be doing it. And a lot of organizations, no matter how clear they think they are, as soon as that starts to disseminate down the organization, then people get their own view of what they think the purpose is and what they think the direction of the company even is, if they're not constantly reminded. And so a high-performing team has clarity first and foremost in my mind. And I know a lot of sort of experiments and anecdotal things have come through speaking to, let's say, a board team who might have 10 members on them, and you take them away separately and say, right, what's the purpose of this organization? And you can come back with 10 separate answers.
Yeah, sure.
They might be similar, but they're not the same. And as soon as they start to realize that, you can start to say, well, if you 10 who are leading this organization can't be clear as to what this is, then why do you expect your organization to have that clarity as well? So that's one of the first things that I would always work on, is what are the results that you're trying to drive? And that's not just profit, it's how you're looking to do that as well.
Right. Wow. So I was going to ask you what sort of solutions people look for, but you've sort of covered that. I would imagine that, having spent that time at McLaren, and I used to follow Formula One racing every Sunday when there was a race on, when I lived in South Africa and even Zimbabwe when we had TV. And what amazed me was the efficiency of the pit teams. It's not like being in the McLaren factory, but I think there's a good analogy here. You have exactly the right number of people on a team that you need, right? One for each wheel, one for the lifts, and et cetera, and they know to the 10th of a second what they've got to do and how quickly they've got to do it. And that's a difference between that driver or that team winning or losing the race, right? As the effectiveness of the teamwork in the pits. So can you use that? Are you able to use those sort of lessons in the business to help the businesses you go to?
Exactly. I mean, that is one of the clearest examples that people can connect with very easily. It's very visual. If you take a step back from that in terms of why the pit stop can make or break the race, you go back a few years, even to I think it's about 2008, 2009, when they were still refueling. You didn't need to change the tires. There's no point in changing the tires any quicker, because refueling was the bottleneck in that process.
Right.
Refueling would typically take about 10 to 12 seconds.
Yep.
And it was only when refueling was taken out, or the rules of your organization, or the climate that you're working in changed. COVID is a classic. The world changes around you. How do you react to that? And actually, it was the reaction to that rule change where people said, wait a minute, I can be trying to get the car going faster and faster, and I might get some tenths of a second around the race. Whereas if I can go from 7 seconds to 3 seconds, I've got 4 seconds cut out of my race.
That's right.
Straight away.
Yeah.
So it's identifying, particularly in times of change, why should I focus on these areas to improve? That's a big lesson, and what not to improve, which is another big lesson off the back of it.
Sure.
But then as you go through and look at the detail, how do you go about taking the pit stop mentality to your organization? And we've, I've done a lot of work in manufacturing. I've been in food manufacturing for a lot of my career as well. And changeovers in a manufacturing world where you're changing between one product and another are a classic example of where you take that pit stop mentality.
Yeah.
But I love taking it to different organizations. And I've taken it to financial institutions or to legal practices and things like that, where it's like, actually, if you can change from this operation to that operation, or this way of thinking, or that meeting to that meeting, you can switch those things over quickly. What advantage does that give you? Is it worth improving that for you? And if it is, let's look at how you go about improving that, working as a team, cutting out those times, getting people working together. And I was only telling the story yesterday of how you can look for external inspiration around that. So once you've got yourself performing, it's like, do I just do the same thing but try to do it better? One of the things McLaren did, I think slightly before my time when I arrived there, but they brought in the Royal Ballet.
Oh. And
they brought the Royal Ballet in to look and observe and feedback on how the pit crew were operating as a team.
Okay.
Because what they did is they said, well, if we think about it, what we're doing is about fluid motion. It's about people being efficient with their movement, and it's about you've got to be strong, you've got to be fast, but actually you've got to be graceful in what you're doing as well. It's a bit of a dance.
Choreography, right?
You've got to choreograph the whole thing.
Yeah.
And if things go wrong, you've got to react to each other.
That's right.
How does a great organization like the Royal Ballet do that? And so you can look, if you start to step back from what you're doing and say, actually, what is it about what we're doing that makes it good or bad? Right. Then you can start to really think about bringing in external influences or just being more open to good practices and good ways of working and high performing in different environments.
Wow.
I think what you're saying also is in terms of clarity of their specific roles.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
I've worked, and I won't name the company, but years ago I worked in the corporate world where there was a lot of overlap with roles. So
Mm.
this person was confused because they thought that was their responsibility. This person thought it was their responsibility. And there was just, anyways, it just didn't work. But I think what you're saying is every person knows exactly the tasks that they need to do in order to perform. And it's a very well choreographed dance from there.
Precisely.
Is that how you would, is that an accurate analogy?
And there's another little nugget that I always like to leave people with that as well, is that when you're looking to improve a team like that, and when you've got people doing a similar role, and you look at who's performing at what level, and you're measuring their performance, the instinct is to look at those who are performing poorly and say, what can you do differently? What the world of Formula One does really well is they go, right, who's performing really well? That left rear tire operator is consistently getting this quicker than everybody else. What can we learn from them and replicate everywhere else? And it's that focus on what's working well and what's helping us to win is a clear thing for that I don't see enough of in organizations. And I really wish people spent a lot more time and energy on those elements, because it's so easy to focus on the negatives. There's so much positive out there.
Absolutely.
Well,
somebody once, I'm sorry, Peter, I just want to jump in one more
no,
time.
carry on.
Just a quick comment. I remember, I remember reading this, where if you have somebody that's doing a good job, if you focused on that person, they could probably get from doing a good job to doing an outstanding job. But if you're then focusing on the person that's doing a poor job to get them to go from poor to good, you're wasting your energy. Rather, you should focus on the good workers and making them even better. Is that, do you agree with that?
Definitely. And what you end up with there is the good ones tend to slip back a little bit as well, because they don't have that attention on them. So they don't have that realization that they can be pushed even more and get even more themselves.
Right.
And it's, sorry, Kathleen, quick one, which follows on really, is not just the people who are doing a good job, but what parts of the organization need fixing. And I remember the story I read very recently in a management book that during the Second World War, the British Air Force spent hundreds of man hours and hundreds of pounds studying the bullet-riddled fighter planes or bombers that landed. And they said, well, we got holes there, we better reinforce that. And somebody said, no, hang on, they're not too bad because they got back with bullet holes. What we need to be doing is studying the planes that didn't get back, because we find out where those bullet holes are, and that's the part that needs reinforcing or armor plating. So, and I think how many businesses spend tons of money on polishing their logo instead of looking at something fundamental like the guy who's not changing left back tire quick enough, Sorry, Kathleen, to jump in with that one.
Absolutely. No, great point. So Paul, what would be the difference between facilitation and mentoring?
So facilitation is taking people, and generally a group of people, through a process in order to get a result.
Okay.
So a good facilitator doesn't necessarily have to have any knowledge about what you're actually doing. So I've facilitated for organizations where the detail of what they do and how they do it is way over my head. And I don't even attempt to try and understand what it is, because what I'm there to do in that moment is to say, right, I'm facilitating a process to generate some ideas from you, or to prioritize some ideas, or to come up with a new way of working, or to get some collaboration. And so I've set out a process. Maybe it's a workshop, maybe it's a series of activities that are there over a longer period of time, but they're there to work with you and to walk you through a process, so that at the back of it, we have an outcome, an output that we've set out as a success factor at the beginning of the day. So that's a facilitation. It's taking a group of people typically through a process in order to get some form of outcome. Mentoring is about sharing your knowledge and your experience with people so that they can learn from that, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's and it differs from coaching a little bit, where I do some coaching as well, which coaching is really, for me, is just about asking questions in order to inspire people's own thinking, to get them taking action in a different way.
Excellent.
If you go back to and I keep thinking I've got an image of ballerinas in tutus running around in the pits in a Formula One race, mixed up with mechanics in overalls, and that image just won't go away. So that's quite a weird. Getting back to using the Formula One as an analogy or as a model for improving businesses, what about communication? Because there has to be good communication. Again, let's go back to the team in the pits that's got to refuel and retire the car that's coming in and give the driver a drink or whatever. They not only do they have to know their task exactly to the split second before they even start, but they also have to have a plan B in case something should go wrong. So how do you set up that communication in a situation like that, and how does that apply to a business situation?
Yeah, well, the communication is a deliberate practice. That's
Right.
and it's a discipline that is recognized as a game changer. So first and foremost, in any organization, realizing that the way in which your teams communicate can be a competitive advantage or a disadvantage. But let's focus on the positives here. It can be a competitive advantage for your organization if your team can communicate most effectively in any moment. Now, there's a couple of elements of the communication. One is if you think about that pit crew, so some learnings that you can take there. So it's about preparation. So during a race weekend, practice and coming up to that race weekend before the race itself, that pit crew are doing maybe about 100 different changes, practice changes of the car, of which some of them, most of them, may be a standard four-wheel change and off you go. But they also practice things like, what if the nose cone gets damaged and we've got to replace the nose cone? Or there's a problem here, we need to tighten something up, we've got some damage to the rear wing, whatever it might be. So those scenarios are thought about beforehand, and they are, you can use data to back this up and say that, these are the problems that have happened in the past, or you can do risk analysis to say, here are the things that are likely to happen or could happen, and if they do, they're going to have a big impact. And so you can start to say, right, what we're going to do. And there's a great a friend of mine is ex-military, and he often talks about this thing about action on. So they, whenever they're preparing to go in the military to go and do some sort of activity, they'll say, "What's the action on ambush at this point?"
Okay.
And so they go, right, what you're essentially saying is, if this happens, what do we do? So you get the team to think that stuff through, and wherever possible, what you can do is you actually get the team to come up with that.
Right.
As a leader, what you can do is set that team up to have the authority and the engagement to say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I want oversight, and I might challenge you, and I might want some additional thinking, but I want to put that to you guys to say, in that moment, what are you going to do? If we can come up with a plan as a team, we're much more likely to put that into action when it eventuates.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
Wow.
tell us about your helping people perform podcasts and who it would benefit.
Yeah, I mean, this has come about over the last year or so. I'm about 40 odd episodes in at the moment. This was a passion of mine, essentially, and realizing on reflection of my own career that everything that I've done has been about helping others perform at their best. And so I'm intrigued about that angle for myself, and rather selfishly wanted to interview lots of people and talk to lots of people about different angles of doing that. Because I do facilitation, I do coaching, I do operational performance in the wider sense, but other people do all sorts of different things. And I wanted to, one, to speak to those people for myself, but two, to expose others to what is available out there. So all the different sorts of coaches, the life coaches, the personal coach, the finance coaches, the people who are there to who are excellent facilitators. I've spoken to there's a lady who's a good friend of mine who's a triathlete, an ultra marathon runner. It's about how do you manage and motivate yourself and help yourself perform. So lots of lessons that can be taken out from there. So I'm looking to help people get inspired as to what are the different ways that you can get help, and also looking to expose for practitioners of helping people perform. Here are all the different ways you could be doing it, and some insights from a wonderful guest as to what's there. I also do a little piece once a week as well, where it's just me to camera sharing some of my direct tips from the F1 world as well. So
Okay, that should be
Excellent. We'll have to
interesting.
tune into that.
yeah,
Oh yeah, I did get a little piece of one of yours. I think your most recent one yesterday, but then something happened, phone rang or something. I never got, yeah, normal story. I never got back to it. So that was interesting. Okay, but we will definitely listen to more. I'm going to ask you my burning question in a moment. I know Kathleen will tell me I must,
Yes.
but there's something else I wanted to ask you. Is the idea of facilitation more acceptable now? Has it become more acceptable over the last, say, 20 years or so?
I think there's a recognition. So when one of the difficulties I see with organizations is they don't see a need for a facilitator or an external facilitator in a lot of cases. And so they'll try to run things themselves. And what you tend to find is you might have a leader, or you might have somebody who's willing and has the energy to run an event and go, right, we're going to get together. We want to get the team together to do a workshop on ideas for how do we improve this part of our business or whatever it might be. And so you get somebody internal to run that for you. Well, it tends to be that person has a real value in inputting into that process. So you miss out on their ability to input, or they influence how the thing is run because they've got their own prior thoughts and prior biases as to what the outcomes might be. So what I'm seeing is more accepting of actually, let's get somebody in who can actually help us with this. And I would always encourage people, take somebody who has no knowledge of your business, but knows how to facilitate.
Yeah.
And there's lots of brilliant people out there.
Oh, yes.
They can take away the biases, they can take away all of those assumptions that you're going into and just help you through the process to get you there.
That's right. And they're not prisoners of the culture. That's the other big problem, right?
Very much so, yeah.
So I got to throw in a quick one. When I was in the corporate world, I was sort of middle range manager back in the 80s, and in a very big, huge corporation in South Africa, which was very formal. We wore suit and tie every day to work. And there was a merger, and the new, now even larger group said, well, go make some changes. You guys can't handle it on your own. We're going to bring in a facilitator. So we all, about 20 of us managers and the MD, the whole deal assembled in the boardroom, and this guy walks in, horror of horrors, in jeans and a t-shirt, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you just saw all the faces drop. Thought, oh my God, we got a hippie coming in here. But being so different, it worked, and he got everyone talking, and it was really good. And that's why I asked you, because the resistance I saw in the 80s, I just wondered if that's gone away largely, and you've answered that very well. Thank you for that, Paul. So yeah, so here's my burning question, and you're a really good one to ask, having been involved in Formula One. Paul, in your experience, is there a single characteristic or mindset that separates successful business leaders or team players from those that remain average, or is it more complicated?
Nothing's ever complicated in my world. I'm a man of simple pleasures. I think it's certainly from a leadership perspective, it's the service and the servant mindset.
Okay.
I think if you can get yourself into that mindset at any level in an organization, any leader, of going, I'm here to help the people in my organization perform at their best. And at an organization, particularly the larger organizations, what they're really looking for these days is, how can I get people who've got the best interests of the organization at heart? So even if it means that their department or their team doesn't shine off the back of what they're doing, they're doing things at the service of the organization and the service of the people in that organization. And that's really comes down to predominantly just knowing your people and speaking to people and saying, what is it, what's stopping you from performing? What do you want to do? What are you passionate about? What's outside of your work? Show people you care about them, and go for the wins, the little wins. It's like, how can we get the best out of you and give you what you need outside of this organization? Flexibility, support, maybe something as simple as sponsorship for a team that you are passionate about coaching on the weekends. Things that are there that show you care will get the most out of people. And that I think is the key thing for me.
Wow, well done. Thank you. That's a very good, very interesting.
Well, we are out of time for today, Paul, but please tell people how they can contact you.
Well, the best way, I mean, you can listen to my podcast, helping people perform there. But that ultimately will point you back to my website. So paulteasdale.co.uk, best place to go. One of the first things you'll see there is a little pop-up to set up 30-minute chat with me, and let's do it. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. I just want to talk to people about their challenges and help connect you with performance that's out there. And if I can help and be of value in any way, then that would be fantastic.
Wonderful. And for our audio listeners, all those details will be in the description on whatever platform you happen to be listening to this on. From me, thank you, Paul. Back to Kathleen to wind it up.
Thank you again, Paul, for being on the show. We so appreciated having you. And once again, thank you all for tuning into our show. And if anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, we invite you to look at our website at theyakkingshow.com. All you need to do is click on the contacts tab where you will find a short application form, and we would love to hear from you. So until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.